we're putting the front suspension back together. Because we have all the suspension parts off and the axle, this is the best order that I found to put this back together. We take the wheel carrier. You need to take the pinch bolt out of the back side. And we need to mate the pinch bolt to this slot, and so the bolt can go at the indentation right here. If the carrier's been on and off a few times, this has probably been compressed together. I found a really good way to put this together if you have everything off the car, or even if you don't. You can adapt this to your needs. The strut will stand up straight. So I take the wheel carrier and I get lined up. And it won't really go on past here. So then if I take a medium chisel and put it in the top of the pinch opening, and then if I tap in, I'm hitting with a downward motion and I'm opening this up. So then by myself, I can stay lined up and expand the pinch joint to get this all the way down. The strut's supposed to bottom out in the carrier slot. Opening up a little bit more. Now I just bottomed out, and I'm in the right groove, and then I can just take this chisel out, and now it's squeezing it again. I'm going to put the bolt back in until we're on the car. The ABS and brake line bracket goes on this bolt, so I'm not tightening it yet. I want to make sure we get everything together nicely first. The front diff is back on. The front subframe is back on. I've already installed the front wishbone bushing because it's way easier to get to those bolts before the subframe goes up on the car. And while the car was down, while the subframe was down, the power steering unit was down, I replaced the inner tie rod and put a new boot on. So we have ABS sensor and brake line bracket. It's all in place, ready to go. And the brake caliper's hanging, ready to be reinstalled. What I found is the best order is first install the wishbone back in. It gets pushed into the rubber slot there. If you're doing this by yourself, the best way I found to do that is put a ratchet strap over the wishbone rubber bushing bracket. So when you tighten the ratchet strap, it pulls as straight as it can on the wishbone. So it'll look like this when it's getting pulled in. If you do it like this, you tighten a few clicks on the ratchet strap, you may actually see it just get pulled in on its own. If it's not starting nice, I just twist it up, back down one time, and then you can usually just watch it start to get pulled in. And then just do that, keep ratcheting it down maybe 1 or 2 clicks at a time until it starts to come out the other side. If we're on a lift, you might be able to just push it in with your shoulders, but in the garage we don't have a lift, so this is a good way to do it by yourself, and you can control it and twist it to get it going in without stressing the rubber bushing inward too much. When you're done installing it, we're going to twist it down like this so that we can install the other parts. The next step for me, reinstall the axle. Push it in until the lock ring clicks. You can't pull it back out easily. And then what I plan to do is to top up the diff fluid so it's just starting to leak out before I put the carrier back. It'll just be easier. But it is serviceable with everything installed. When I install the axle so that I can focus on pushing it in, I have this bungee cord right here available as a helping hand to hold up the outboard side of the axle. Because I found out the hard way that the triple roller bearing on the inside axle, you can just pull it out. And then you have to redo the seal and potentially pack it with grease. So now with the wishbone and the axle installed, we need to get the carrier and the strut in there. Because I'm doing this by myself, I found the best way is hang the strut from the tower and then make sure the axle is started in the bearing and then once that's done, twist the wishbone up, and then at that point, once the wishbone is twisted up, install the ball joint for this side, install it into the subframe, and get it into the wishbone's hole here. If you do that, then you can articulate the arm up and meet the bottom of the carrier. Once we have the carrier and the axle back together, you put on the outer tie rod, attach it to the carrier, put the brakes back on, and then I'm going to attach the sway bar back onto the subframe, swing it up, and attach the links. This is the setup I was talking about. Put the ratchet strap over this and put it on the furthest away loop. And I'm going to tighten it a few clicks, and this should start to go in. If it's not going in, I'll twist this up and back down, and that will usually get it to start going in until the tension isn't pulling hard enough anymore. I think we need to go just a little bit further in there, because without the strap tension, the rubber's going to come out a little bit. I pulled this in just a little bit more, and now I can feel it just at the exit. I put the ball joint on, I just put the ball joint nut on with my hand. The ball joint mounting bolts are just finger tight as well. What I'm going to try to do is just have the wishbone pushed down, insert the axle, and then insert the strut into the strut tower with the carrier, and then put the axle in the carrier, and then I should be able to rest the carrier on the wishbone. We can tighten it all up. We want to meet this mating lip so that we can't see it anymore. Then we know we're fully engaged. If you look at the axle perpendicular, you shouldn't be able to see the lip, the inner lip of where the outer ring of the axle meets the inner lip of the diff flange. So the lock ring, now we've slid in, and then the lock ring has expanded in the channel, which matches the groove, the outside edge of the axle's lock ring groove. So now the splines are meshed together. The other wheel's turning when I do this, but now the inboard side of the axle can't come out without being pried with the fork, because now the ring is expanded in the channel. So now I'm going to change how I have this hung up so that we can get the brake caliper out of the shock tower, and we'll get the shock and the carrier in here. I moved the brake caliper hanger down, and I redid my axle hanger. So now put the shock with the carrier in first. We need to make sure we line up the adjustment pin, put it on the back side. There's just enough room to mate these, so I'm mating the axle in at the same time getting the wishbone ball joint lined up. Okay, let's make sure this doesn't fall off. With these hangers, it was very easy to do this reinstall just by myself. Okay, now we are ready to finish putting the carrier items on. We have new brake pads, and I've lubricated the caliper bolts. I installed the brake line and sensor bracket. So we will reinstall the dust shield on this side. Don't forget the ABS sensor. It inserts on the front side. And there's one screw holding it in. I tightened the axle nut as much as I can. Now I'm starting to spin the axle. So now, if we put the brakes on, I can finish tightening that. Let's get the rotor back on. And then the caliper bracket. I'm reusing the caliper bracket bolts. They're not that old. They're not too bad. But you want to add a little bit of blue Loctite to make sure they don't come out when you're using the brakes. Now with the caliper bracket on there, we can reinstall caliper. On left-hand drive, the left side is the one with the brake wear sensor. If you're replacing the pads, replace the sensor. The sensor goes here, mounts back here, and then goes into this junction box. Got the steering back on. Now we just need to fill the front diff, so it's just leaking a little bit. Put the plug in, put the exhaust on, see how this thing drives.